You've heard about Jon and some of his responsibilities at GM. I want to amplify that a little bit by saying Jon, as head of global product planning before he took over this new role last summer running GM Ventures, really was one of the fathers of the Chevrolet Volt. And I'm entirely biased because my firm has worked with GM for the last 5 years, but not only is the Volt won Car of the Year from the Detroit Auto Show and Motor Trend and other publications, but I think it represents a step change in the approach to innovation at GM. And so we're going to talk about Volt, we're going to talk about ventures, but before we get into all that, I want to talk a little bit about this unbelievable period of the last 2 years. I mean, Jon has been a member of the senior leadership team at GM, so he rode this ride, the financial crisis, the bankruptcy, coming out of it in a mere 39 days, and then ramping up to a record-setting IPO. And one of the reasons we invited Jon here was to really talk about the new GM. You've seen that phrase, but Jon's going to tell you a little bit about what that means. So let me start right there. What's different about General Motors today than the GM that you grew up with over the last 30 years?
Yeah. Well, there are some things that are different, certainly with the financial structure of the company, balance sheet particularly. But there are other things that really cut to the operations of the business itself, our operating business units around the world, and quite frankly, where we're going to put our priorities going forward. I know it's an expression that maybe, one word, a kind of a cliche, but it really was a roller coaster. On June 1st, 2009, we filed for bankruptcy. It was the fourth largest bankruptcy in U.S. history, the largest, I believe, of an industrial corporation. And 18 months later, we came out and did the largest IPO in U.S. history. And, so it really was a roller coaster ride during that period of time. And I think there was a lot of reflection, certainly going in and certainly coming out, about the fact that we had to change the enterprise and we had to change it in a very fundamental way. And quite frankly, this was our second chance, and you don't get that many second chances, certainly not corporations anyway. And so we really had to do a lot of work in terms of what we were going to be all about. And we focused around four things. It's really culture, and that means a culture of being aggressive, being flexible, doing a lot more with what we have in terms of resources to work with. It's about a customer focus. One of the problems of the old GM was we had too many brands, too much capacity. We sometimes did things that we thought we had to do simply because we were kind of stuck in that trap and we didn't know how to get out. And so customer focus in a completely different way has to be part of the equation. The third one is technology, and there's a relationship between a focus on technology and GM Ventures that we can get to. But really, it's about giving our customers the very best technology that's out there, and certainly that was not the case in the old GM. And then finally, it's about leadership. Dan Ackerson is fond of talking about Team GM. That is, it's not about engineering being successful or marketing being successful or finance being successful. It's about us all plugging in and being successful as a GM team.
So let me pick up on that, because you said culture, technology, customer leadership. When Ventures was created, obviously a lot of people here would think, okay, well, that's to find new technology in the market. But in your mind, does the new GM, in terms of the emphasis on culture, can you, from the perspective of running GM Ventures, impact the culture of General Motors as a whole?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to work at it, to be sure, because you don't change the culture of a company from one day to the next. And the culture is a lot more a culture of a company is a lot more than just a handful of people. So you certainly have to drive it. There's no two ways about that either. But the whole idea is really to get much more aggressive in terms of going after technology. And, you know, it's a little bit about giving up some of the things that you're comfortable with. I mean, I'm not sure about other companies that are represented in the room, but, you know, when you go back to the heyday of General Motors, basically we did all technology development in-house. I mean, it was all done in our four walls or with our captive component companies. And then after a while, the business model changed. And it was more about we do some things in-house, and we do some things with tier one suppliers, big automotive suppliers like Bosch and Conti and JCI and Lear and many others. But quite frankly, what's missing from all of that is really trying to be on the leading edge of technology. And if you're just doing what you can do in-house and that which is available on the market, perhaps to all OEMs, you're missing out on the real opportunity to go out there and lead. And so that's really the big idea behind GM Ventures. It's a new way of doing business at GM. It is not in any way the current way of doing business. And talking about culture, it's going to take people, you know, a bit of time. We're not going to give them very much time, but it'll take a little bit of time to really drive that throughout the company.
So if you're now on this journey of becoming a company that embraces this culture of technology, cutting edge technology, innovation, how did Volt happen? I mean, it was let's talk about that process. Was it a disruptive innovation? Was it incremental because you'd already done EV1, you know, of the famed or infamous who killed the electric car?
Yeah.
How did you achieve that breakthrough? You know, what were the lessons you learned from it?
Yeah. First of all, it was not the product of a, you know, methodical corporate process where, you know, you had groups of people sitting down and pouring through various technologies and things like that. That's not how the concept came to be. Actually, the way it came to be was Bob Lutz, who was the former vice chairman of product development, global product development, called me into his office one day. This was early in 2006. And he said, look, he said, I'm tired of everybody talking about what every other OEM can do. I want us to do a blowout, game-changing concept car, and we're going to unveil that in the Detroit Auto Show next year, which would have been January 2007. And what Bob wanted to do was what we all wish we could do, which was basically a vehicle that would seat 4 or 5 people, a normal family car, a car that everybody could have as their first car in the household. And yet this thing, you know, the way he wanted to do it was going to have hundreds and hundreds of miles of range. You know, it was nirvana. You know, I told Bob, I said, Bob, I know what you're looking for, but what we're going to get here is it's going to be a giant battery that we're somehow going to figure out how to put wheels on, because battery technology, even the latest battery technology, and lithium-ion at that time was still pretty cutting-edge stuff, even that technology isn't good enough to do it. So here's what we ought to do. Let's downsize the battery so that most people drive electrically in their daily commute. 80% of US drivers, and by the way, it's true for Europe as well, drive 40 miles or less on a daily basis. In fact, 50% of the people drive 25 miles or less. So we put enough battery on board so that most people drive their daily commute. And for longer distance, we put a small gasoline engine on board, hooked to a generator, and it generates more electricity to keep you going down the road. Then we don't get into the problems that we had with the EV1, because we had, quite frankly, infrastructure problems with the EV1. Part of it was our own doing because we used inductive charging, which was a different technology than some of the other EVs were using. But quite frankly, the idea was, look, let's make sure that everybody gets home, because once they get home, they can recharge. So most people are going to use gasoline. Some people will use, most people are going to use electricity for their daily commute. Some people will use a little bit of gasoline, and of course, if you go long distances and you don't charge up, you're going to use more. But it can be a first car for everybody, and we can pull it off. And so that's pretty much what we talked about. I was scribbling furiously on pieces of paper to do all of the various calculations about how this thing would work, and we pretty much said, okay, that's what we're going to try to get done. And a year later, when we had a chance to do lots of simulations to prove that it would work and lots of other studies, we unveiled it at the Detroit Auto Show. I would say there were a number of detractors inside and outside the company. And I think it's only been relatively recently where people, I'd say largely, will say, wow, that thing is a technological marvel. So what did we learn from the whole thing? We can lead, but we're going to have to embrace risk. Look, we didn't have a battery pack at the time. Nobody had done a battery pack, the kind that we were talking about, prismatic cells, large cells, automotive grade, trying to basically have a propulsion system that would be electric.
Yeah.
And the engine was irrelevant for the first 40 miles, and then later on you'd seamlessly switch over. I mean, that was something that nobody had ever done before. And
I think in the reviews and everything, that's the single point that's gotten some of the most attention was the fact that Volt is this transition to a future that we may have pure electrics and the infrastructure for it, but the fact, and if people don't realize, this is a vehicle that you can drive electric, as John said, and then put gas in if you need to. So.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I've always said the Volt really represents the tipping point. It's the tipping point between the incumbent technology, which has been refined for more than 100 years, internal combustion engines, and the new world of basically using electricity as the primary fuel for automobiles. And, as we get better battery technology, as we figure out ways to take cost out of the new incumbent technology, that's really the promise of getting ourselves in transportation off of almost complete and total dependence on fossil fuels, gas.
All right, so
and diesel.
we got some news people in the audience and a lot of people tweeting, I'm sure, so let's see if we can make some news. What everybody wants to know is this car is great. I want to buy one. There's a waiting list. But can Chevrolet and General Motors really ramp up production? I mean, the numbers that have been reported in the media are pretty low. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go back to Prius and so on, their first 5 years of production numbers are pretty low. But people want to see this car go mainstream. So how much can you, A, ramp up production of Volt? To what degree will GM bring Voltec, the Volt technology, this mix of electric and extended range to other vehicles, Cadillac, Buick, SUVs, whatever? And how much deeper are you going to go on electrification throughout GM, including in China?
Well, geez, that's 3 questions at once. So we do understand that there's demand out there for the Volt, and we're going to ramp that vehicle up as fast as we possibly can.
Any numbers you can give us?
I'm not going to go beyond the numbers that you could already look up because, quite frankly, we're still working through just exactly how fast we can ramp up production. And quite frankly, it's not as...
But if there's demand for like 100,000 vehicles a year within, let's say, 2015, you think you can meet it?
Well, we're going to go after the demand that's out there. And ramping up production isn't just something that takes place in our assembly plant. I mean, we have to ramp up all the suppliers, right? It's the suppliers like LG Chem that have to supply more cells and quicker. It's people who supply us with various components in power electronics and a lot of other components in the vehicle. And so, that's the reason why it's not just as simple as saying, well, we'll just tell the plant that they should increase production and it all works. It doesn't work unless you get deep into the supply chain and actually make sure that it works. Relative to your question on electrification, I will only say that electrification for us means more than the Volt. Okay? Beyond that, I'm not going to talk about...
But you guys did announce at the show a vehicle for China, right? A pure EV?
That may be something that our colleagues in China announced. I'm not sure, and I'm not going to wander into that one by making some unauthorized product announcements.
Okay.
But suffice to say, look, suffice to say, our electrification strategy does not start and stop with the Chevy Volt, okay? If I go beyond that, you're going to be up here peeling back the onion, and pretty soon, I'll get myself in a lot of trouble.
Fair enough. I'm sure people will have questions during the
they'll
Q&A.
try and dig it out.
All right, let's talk about ventures. So why did GM create a ventures arm?
Okay.
What are you going to invest? What does the organization look like?
All right.
Let's start there.
Okay. So, look, one of the things that we did coming out of bankruptcy was we decided that we were going to have a new vision statement for the whole company. Old GM had a vision statement much like many organizations. It was many lines. It was somehow totally inclusive. It somehow had all the right words and so on and so forth. But nobody in the company could actually say it word for word. So when we came out of bankruptcy, our CEO at the time, Ed Whitaker, said, look, I want something really simple. And the vision they came up with, it was Ed together with the executive committee, was the mission of General Motors is to design, build, and sell the world's best vehicles, period. That's 100% of the vision statement for the company. And you know something about it? While it's fairly simple, and you know, you may say, well, I want to add some more words here and there, the fact of the matter is everybody can rally around that, okay? Because our core business is designing, building, and selling vehicles around the world. So what's the story with GM Ventures? Really, the idea of GM Ventures, the mission of GM Ventures, is to support and accelerate General Motors' vision to design, build, and sell the world's best vehicles by making equity investments in startup companies that are developing future automotive technology. That's really what it's all about. Again, it's back to what I talked about a few minutes ago, which is technology being one of the 4 priorities that we're really going to drive in the months and years ahead. And so that's what we're trying to do at GM Ventures.
Is this a first-time thing? I mean, did it have a ventures arm ever?
No, we never had a ventures arm. The subsidiary, we formed a separate subsidiary in June. I showed up in July. So it's pretty early days for us. We've put some money to work. We have a lot of other ideas that we're going to continue to work on. And we're really going to be focused around 5 sectors.
Put that slide up.
Yeah, there's a slide, perhaps. Hopefully it's up on the side screens. So the focus is on early stage startup companies, and it's really in 5 areas. Automotive clean tech, which is what we're discussing here today. Infotainment, which is really where information and entertainment intersect in the vehicle. Smart materials. What are smart materials? It's lightweight materials, eco-friendly materials, phase change materials, even forming technology would fit in that category. Other automotive-related technology, unbeknownst to a lot of people, the average vehicle has a tremendous amount of processing technology. In fact, the Chevy Volt has its own IP address. It has over 100 processors, individual processors, throughout the vehicle, and over 10 million lines of software code, 10 million. That's not my number. That's a number that the folks at IBM gave us. They said, in fact, that amount of software code is a little bit ahead of what a military jet like the F-35 would have in it in terms of software code. And so there's an awful lot of processing technology on board a vehicle today, and therefore sensors, processors, memory, a lot of other things wind up being important. And the final category is value chain and business model. Value chain plays are where we might find an idea that would generate more upstream or downstream revenue for us. You know, a business model play would be going to market in a different way or having some new spin on the business that might be directly related to our automotive business but with a twist. And so that's what our focus is going to be with ventures. There's an awful lot of the vehicle that we're not going to focus on. But we really think that going forward, those 4 areas plus value chain and business models are really the leverage points for the business. And we have a global charter, so we're going to chase down technology across the globe. We still have some work to do to actually operationalize in a complete way what we're going to try to do outside the U.S. So still work in progress there, but the idea is really to focus on these areas and put money to work and get to future automotive technology first.
We want to talk about a couple of the investments. Before we do, how do you see working with other VCs, and any message to VCs who are here?
No, we want to work with other VCs. I personally think that VCs add tremendous value to the whole thing. I mean, first of all, VCs, most of the firms have a lot of experience, far more experience than we're going to have for quite some time. Secondly, they're used to dealing with relatively small embryonic companies and growing them. That would not describe a company like General Motors.
Right.
Third, they're very experienced in dealing with management teams, and quite frankly, they know when to cut things and move on. And in that regard, they'll probably be a little less patient than we would be. And so we would like to invest with other VCs. In fact, I've told the guys, if we find a company and there isn't a VC on the scene, we ought to ask ourselves, do we really want to proceed unless we've got somebody else with us that really brings those skills to the party? And what can we do in return? For venture capital and startup companies, look, we think we bring 4 pieces of value to the party. First of all, we're investing with the understanding that if the company's not successful, we aren't successful either. There isn't like a parallel in-house program that's going to be running when we invest in a startup. We aren't going to have 2 or 3 different projects with tier 1 suppliers that are exactly the same thing. And so our interests are aligned with the company at the outset. If they're successful, we're successful, and if they're not, we are in deep trouble. Secondly, we're going to invest as a customer, not just as an investor. And so the idea is we're gonna make investments in startup companies, but we want to do commercial agreements with them. And that has tremendous value to a startup company because all startup companies have a common problem, which is identifying customers and markets at a fairly early stage. Sure, they can identify groups of customers and potential markets, but to have somebody step forward early, particularly with the scale that we bring and say, look, we not only believe in the technology, but we want to be your customer, and we're willing to write a commercial agreement right now that does that, that can be hugely beneficial. Third, automotive is a treacherous business, very complicated, a lot of very expensive and sophisticated testing facilities, and a lot of very sophisticated requirements. And so we will support the portfolio company by making technical experts available. They may not understand the company's technology, but they certainly understand the legal requirements, the in-house requirements, all of the other things that go into bringing a technology into automotive. And we have some pretty sophisticated facilities that would either be unaffordable or frightfully expensive. Yeah, I guess that's the same thing. Unaffordable or unobtainable completely, okay? And so we think we can bring that to the party. Doing technical due diligence on the companies, which is helpful to independent venture capital firms. And finally, we think we can probably raise the profile of a company if we roll in and say, okay, we want to invest in the company, we want to do a commercial agreement, so we're already saying we want to be a customer, and we do that at a relatively early stage. Frankly, it de-risks the whole structure, equity structure of the company and the whole startup company. Is it going to be successful? Will it find a market? We can take a lot of risk out of that right at the very beginning.
So one of the issues that I've been most passionate about for the last year is finding new ways for big corporates and the venture community, both the venture capital community and the entrepreneurs, to find new ways to work together. We've been doing it, talking with you, with General Electric, with the Eco-Imagination Challenge. But for the entrepreneurs in the room, or those who may be hearing this secondhand, what's the message to the entrepreneurs? Why should they work with you, and is there any fear that you can help them overcome in terms of, if I get locked up with GM, am I not going to be able to sell my crazy new battery technology to Ford and Toyota, et cetera?
Yeah, look, we're going to be an investor. GM Ventures is an investor, so we're going to take an investor's point of view. And we realize that if we come rolling in with let's say, terms that are completely unacceptable, we're not going to find too many takers to work with us, right? Either the companies themselves or the venture capital firms that are backing those companies. So we're not going to roll in and ask for exclusive domain licenses and crazy stuff like that. All we're looking for, to be quite honest, is a head start on the rest of the competition. What is a head start? A head start is give us exclusivity for 12 months. Maybe it's 18 months. I don't know. It depends on each and every situation. Give us a head start so that basically we can do what it is we need to do, which is get out front of the other guys, because we're taking the risk, we're putting the money to work. And we've done that. I know of a couple that we've done that so far, and it works pretty well. Principally because, a startup company can't work with 4 or 5 OEMs all at the same time. They just don't have enough bandwidth to do it, even if they wanted to do it. And if we're willing to step forward and cut the right kind of deal and say, look, this is a head start, nothing more, and if you want to bring in Ford or Chrysler or Toyota or Honda or whoever afterwards, terrific. Just roll up the value of the company, and the money that we put in at the early stage is just worth more when there's some sort of a liquidation event.
So let's talk about a couple of your investments. You made an investment in Bright Automotive.
Bright Automotive.
PowerMat. And then
PowerMat.
you recently announced an interesting licensing deal with the DOE Argonne lab.
Correct.
So tell us.
And SOC 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So Bright Automotive, the big idea there is Bright is developing a lightweight commercial van. Ruben Munger is with us. I've seen him a couple of times today. He's the CEO of Bright. We made an investment back in August of last year, 2010. I would call it a catalyzing investment, basically to get things moving. Bright will be raising more money. You can bet that we will be an investor, but we'll be more than that. We're probably going to sign some commercial agreements with the company to supply components to them, powertrain, basically work with them in a partnership way. And, it makes a lot of sense for us because this van will be a plug-in hybrid van, so it'll be an electrified entry. And while we haven't decided exactly how it will work in GM, we haven't actually decided to put it in our portfolio at this moment because it's still a product that's coming together, and we haven't decided whether we will distribute it or not through our GM distribution systems. There are a lot of possibilities for collaboration with the company. SOC 3, solid state.
Actually, before you go, then let me just ask you, do you think, Elon Musk is going to speak later, I think, from Tesla. Tesla, as Ira mentioned earlier, has worked with Daimler and Toyota. Do you think any new automotive company can get to market today without partnering with one of the big OEMs?
I suppose it's possible, but it's a lot harder. You see, there are a bunch of components in the car that just go along for the ride. You know what I mean? When I say they go along for the ride, you need 100% of the parts there to have a car, but they don't all want to be mission critical, right? Otherwise, you got so much risk. If you're going to try to do every single thing from scratch without leveraging anything, it winds up being a very, very much higher risk proposition. And so to the extent that you can find components that work, light switches, door latches, lots of parts that customers don't see, you don't have to put all your effort into horsing around trying to develop those parts and make them defect-free.
Yeah.
You can really focus on the big idea, which is about the vehicle itself and the propulsion system and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I'd say it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to chew up more engineering dollars and effort. It's going to chew up more capital if you want to do 100% new from scratch, not leveraging anything.
Yeah.
So.
PowerMat, tell us a little bit about
PowerMat, yeah.
Or SOC 3, either one.
SOC 3 is solid-state battery technology, and the big idea there, I think we all know, there were several speakers this morning that sort of referenced battery technology. The big idea is we got to get better energy density out of batteries, right? Batteries today, by mass or by volume, basically have 100 times less energy density than gasoline or diesel fuel. 100 times. And that's the reason why gasoline and diesel fuel always win this story of why do we like gas and diesel fuel? Because it has tremendous energy density. And up until, let's say, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, it was very affordable, right? Now things are changing a little bit. Now we got to get after, okay, so what are we going to do to improve energy density of batteries? And there are various technologies that are out there, and SOC 3 is working on one of them. PowerMat. PowerMat is a really interesting one. This is a company that was developing inductive wireless charging for personal devices, okay? And in fact, their retail products are available in Best Buy, I think in Walmart and other locations. And this is something that I think in all of our vehicles, if you jump in a typical vehicle today, you'll see at least one power cord, maybe two, okay? And for years and years, our guys in design have shown various places in the vehicle where they would say, and this is where you put your personal device and it recharges, okay? Now, it was vaporware because we didn't have a technology behind it. It was a nice idea, but we didn't have it. So we looked around at various charging companies that were out there. We settled on PowerMat, approached the company, and at the CES, we basically announced that we were going to do a multi-year, multi-million-dollar commercial deal with them to basically offer PowerMat's technology in all, well, I'm not sure it'll be in all our vehicles, but we basically have an opportunity to put it in as many vehicles in General Motors worldwide as we want. So it's a worldwide deal. And basically what it is it's basically going to be a little area in the car. Mine has the little PowerMat back on it. You put your device down. It basically inductively charges it. It's a smart charger, so it only charges the battery as much as it needs, and then it shuts off, so there's none of this vampire power loss that you get. Doesn't overcharge your battery, which hurts your battery life. By the way, it's already passed all of the, at least the retail products have already passed all of the ISO requirements for medical devices, including pacemakers, so not to worry about that. And quite frankly, what we're going to do is take their technology, which was originally developed for the home, and plug it in the car. And we're going to have it in a lot of vehicles in General Motors' portfolio around the world.
Cool. I think it would be interesting for people to hear about the Argonne licensing
Argonne
deal, too.
Hey, thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, and I didn't pick up on it. Yeah, Argonne. You know, the national labs do some tremendous work, okay? And in particular, we checked in with the Argonne folks and found out that, you know, that they had a number of patents that involve cathode technology. It's called, I believe, lithium-rich, layered composite cathode technology, okay?
Rolls right off the tongue.
Rolls right off the tongue, very simple. And basically, look, for people that are not battery experts, there are 3 elements in a battery, and these 3 elements have to improve if we're going to get more capable batteries. It's the anode, it's the cathode, and it's the electrolyte. Those are the 3 things. And until you get after basic improvements in those 3 constituent parts of a battery, you're not going to have a more capable battery measured in energy density, you know, for EVs, PHEVs, and all manner of electrified vehicles. Argonne had this, they had a number of patents. We looked into them very closely. We decided we were going to license those patents because there aren't too many, let's say, really new ideas for cathode technology. There are some anode companies out there, and I'm sure people in the room, some of the venture capital firms have backed some of those. But when you look at the cathode, there aren't that many out there, and Argonne has some really very promising stuff. And so we decided, look, we got to make sure that we got access to that technology. It's IP at this moment, so it's got to be, you know, let's say, turned into, powder and developed and validated and so on and so forth. So we can't, jump from one day to the next from having IP to having a finished battery, but it's extremely promising. And we thought it was really important to the point where we wanted to license it.
So you'll license it for GM's use or potentially for third-party use, too?
No, we licensed it for ourselves.
Right.
Again,
which is kind of an unusual activity for venture, no?
Yeah, it was actually licensed by GM GTO, which is our global technology arm that basically holds all of the licenses, but basically we work together.
You found the deal. And
we worked together with the folks at Argonne. Jeff Chamberlain was very instrumental in hammering this thing out. And stay tuned. There'll be more coming about that particular piece of technology in the not too distant future.
Well, please join me first in congratulating Jon and GM on the success of the Chevrolet Volt and thanking him for joining us today.